Tack så mycket. Thank you very much. I right now have the pleasure to introduce Professor Stec, who's connecting with us from the United States. I know she would have loved to be here with us, but previous engagements did not allow for it, and I hope that we'll have the occasion to meet you in person. Dear Professor Stec, so you have the floor, please.
Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Anna Stec. I'm professor in fire toxicity at University of Central Lancashire in United Kingdom. And my work focuses on fire emissions and their effect on the human environment. Presentation today will be on the firefighters' exposures to fire toxins and their health, which will include cancers and diseases. Next slide, please. So while I appreciate that the discussion today is on asbestos, we have to really include that firefighters are exposed to a huge cocktail of toxicants, which are potentially toxic and might lead to the cancers and diseases. And firefighters are really not only exposed during their work or the fire attendants, but they're bringing that contaminant to their workplace and also to their home. Next slide, please. So if we look for the different types of toxins, they will have a different health outcomes. But additionally to that, there is now enough information and knowledge that firefighters are exposed to toxins not only via inhalation route. Inhalation route is particularly related to, for example, wildland fires who are not wearing any respiratory protection. But with the increasing physical activity, we've got increase of the body temperature, we've got dehydration, which allows toxins to be taken via skin. Additionally, we know that firefighters suffer from digestive cancers, and digestive cancers are indicating swallowing the soot and particulates and other smoke components, including through the contaminated hands, such as eating and drinking. Next slide, please. So the work that was commissioned by the UK Fire Brigades Union, which actually initiated all the work around the firefighters that we did, was delivered by 11,000 responders. So we ran the survey on firefighters' exposures to toxins and also the cancer likelihood linked to their activity. I can proudly say that actually that survey is run now in 4 different European countries. So the effects will be probably analysed soon. And what we found is that there are direct links between firefighters' activities to cancers. So what you've got odds ratio is indicating if the cancer likelihood is higher. And increasing the age of a firefighter, you can see that getting firefighter longer in a fire service, increasing cancer likelihood twice. Similarly, workplace contamination, such as smell of the smoke at the workplace, or having not dirty and clean zones for the firefighting gears, or not separating clean and dirty PPE. That's all related to increased cancer incidence. Additionally, we're talking about personal contamination and decontamination, which we can see from the graph that firefighters who eat with the contaminated hands and contaminated PPE have twice higher cancer likelihood, such as soot in nose for the prolonged time. Next slide, please. So where are we up to? We generally are a little bit behind. So US, the California was the first state to pass a firefighters' presumptive illness law. That was over 40 years ago. Currently, 48 out of 50 states, they've got the health presumptive law direct link between firefighters' occupation and cancer. What I would like to also add is that many states in US, they offer health monitoring, sometimes mandatorily on annual basis. That kind of presumptive legislation was followed by Canada and Australia. And more recently, as mentioned by Polish representative, Poland introduced in 2019 presumptive legislation for firefighters' cancers as well as diseases. Additionally, as mentioned earlier, they introduced best decontamination policy, which I'll mention at the end of my talk. I had also privilege to be a member of the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which actually found direct link between firefighters and cancer for specific 2 cancers, which was mesothelioma and bladder, and they found very strong evidence for 5 cancers. The report's supposed to be fully published this year. Next slide, please. So if we take the firefighters' deaths, obviously the huge wealth of the data come from US, and you can see that majority of line of duty firefighters, they die from cancer. And that's followed by the cardiovascular diseases. If we go for the respiratory system diseases, that's only 3%, which indicates that firefighters have multiple pathways of exposures, not necessarily only via inhalation route. Next slide, please. And we've analysed that data also within UK or Scottish firefighters for the last 20 years. What is really astonishing and depressing is that you can see quite similar profile. So we've got that 42% of firefighters die from cancer. And again, that's followed by the cardiovascular diseases. Next slide, please. I do appreciate that that looks a bit of complicated table, but the main messages I would like to say is that there is a huge surge of publications at the moment in Europe on cancer incidence and cancer mortalities. Scandinavian countries, really well established cancer incidence and mortality in Norway, Finland and Sweden. Similarly, France, Spain, more recently in Germany. And if we look at the cancers, we can overall see that the cancer mortality rates are higher for firefighters when we compare to general public. Additionally, if you look at the types of the cancers, you can see skin cancer, which again indicates dermal intake of toxins, and also digestive types of the cancers. The major message is that some of those cancers are rare cancers, and such as leukemia. So coming back to the earlier discussion that we should correlate them to the chemicals or the fire effluents that are released to the fires, that's going to be really difficult. If we take benzene, for example, or polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are classified as carcinogenic, we know that they are released in every single fire. And in terms of the toxicological health outcome, they're actually leading to multiple types of cancers. Next slide, please. So the message additionally to that is that firefighters get these cancers earlier in their life. And I think that's the really huge message I'm trying to point, is if you look at the table, we're looking at the peak cancer mortality age. For any type of the cancer that firefighters die, you can see 15, 20 years later in general public. Not mentioning that those types of the cancers are rare cancers, so with low chances of recovery. Additionally, if you look at the cancer incidence, it's much earlier. So when we're talking about the age prevalence for the cancer mortality, that's 65, 69 on average. When we're talking about cancer incidence from our UK data, it's 45, 49 years old. So if the firefighter, let's say, unfortunately is diagnosed with the leukemia, typical screening or health monitoring for that cancer is for the general public is at the age of 70 plus. When the firefighter is diagnosed at 45, 49 years old, it's actually taking a very long time to diagnose properly and then treat, with very low chances of firefighter coming back to work. Next slide, please. So while we're talking about asbestos, and the work is really fantastic in terms of classifying this as class 1 according to IAC, we've got exposure limits, and also mesothelioma is classified as firefighter occupational disease in the US and UK. We cannot say anything about fire contaminants and firefighters' exposures and their higher risk of occupation. Next slide, please. So I was kind of asked to put the major points. I'm sure you recognize that through your revision on the asbestos. But my points are, can you please acknowledge and recognize firefighters' occupation as a higher risk based on the latest available scientific knowledge? IAC actually put huge amount of the information and data to review all the worldwide studies on the firefighters. And there is really not disputable correlations between firefighters, links between their occupation and cancer. Additionally, if we're looking at the firefighters' preventative monitoring, already well established in US, we can really look at the introduction early of diagnosis of diseases and cancers in firefighters through, for example, introduction of the health monitoring. And two extra points, workplace exposure limits. While they are there for the workers, they are really not in many cases applicable to firefighters. So if we're looking at the workplace exposure limits, we're typically talking about time weight average, which is 5 days, 8 hours per day. And if we look, let's say, on a particular matter, or if we look at the benzene, that exposure, weekly or or for a monthly exposure, that typical worker is exposed, will not be applicable to a firefighter who is not wearing respiratory protection and is going to tackle wildland fire, because the concentrations of those toxins are already out of the roof. And something mentioned by my colleagues, single European harmonized decontamination policy. Well, we've done the best practice document, which was commissioned by the Fire Brigades Union. It was hugely taken by the different countries. It's translated now into 9 different languages: Portugal, Spain, Czech Republic, Poland, Portugal, and so on. It's also translated in China at the moment. And as colleague from Poland mentioned, it was implemented by the Polish government, and some recommendations taken and implemented in the fire rescue services. So the work is there, it's just making sure that we can work together. And similarly, what we do with many European countries at the moment is running that survey that will provide us more information on European firefighters' exposure to toxins and potential health outcomes. And on that ground, next slide, please. I will thank you for your attention, and more than happy to share our scientific data and as well follow up with the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Stec. This was really adding even more science and evidence to the debate. I just want to have a very quick follow-up on using my prerogative as a chair, because I just want to understand from you as an expert and an academic on the field. So here, obviously, we had a call for more studies and more evidence. And that, of course, takes more time. But what you are saying in your presentation is that there is evidence, and there are already studies, and there are already things that we can actually implement today based on that evidence. Would you rather support that and say that we have the evidence to act now, or we need more studies in order to have better measures? I mean, I just want to understand what's your opinion or position on that.
From my opinion is that there is enough data to have direct link, and you've got IR classification 1, firefighter occupation is carcinogenic for 2 times cancer and 5 with the very high likelihood. So there is undisputable connection, not mentioning that you've got countries such as US, Canada and Poland who's got presumptive legislation to protect firefighters. So I think that can be adopted. However, the typical criticism I'm getting is that obviously US, Canada might have different policies, different practices, which might not be applicable in European countries. And recognition, for example, of the specific diseases and cancers from the wildland fires and wildland firefighters who are attending those types of the fires might be different when we're talking about structural fires. So yes, there is a need for the research, and particularly if we want to harmonize the system and work together. But in terms of the evidence is very strongly there, which is, the work is for over 40 years on that topic and really well published and documented.
Thank you very much. Very clear answer on that. Let me just look right now to the